Hey everybody, it's Conscious Medium Brandon Ross. Thank you so much for joining me on this very special stream of consciousness. Today we're going to be talking about Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who is the cornerstone of the civil rights movement and martyred on April 4th, 1968. He has long since been the presence of argument for so many things for civil rights. Now, as we take a look at his chart, we're going to actually understand why it is that he became the center focus and why it is that he was perfectly okay, because he was ardent in who he was and what he believed in the next stream of consciousness. Hey guys, how are you? Thanks for sticking around. Before we get too far, I want you to actually click like and subscribe to the channel and make sure you share this with a friend. This is a great way to show them how astrology works with something they may be very familiar with, at least the current events. By the way, also, I want to thank you guys for supporting the Funny You Should Say That book. Click on the link below. It'll bring you right to a couple of different options in order to get it. Amazon will get it to you in just a couple of days. And thanks so much. I am on the New York Times actually the pretty good seller list. Anyways, all right, Martin Luther King. He is the patron of basically all that kind of comes into civil rights in the United States. And by the way, I'm going to really, really encourage you, if you haven't taken the time, do a little bit of reading, but make sure you have a good source, because I'm going to show you at the end why it is that it's really important to do so. This is his general chart. This is his natal chart is there on the inside, and then on the outside was the transit of November 4th in Memphis. So a couple of things here, just concentrating in on the inner wheel. I want to point out the sun in Capricorn in the 9th house. What this means is he is realizing that he's supposed to be part of a greater good and a lesson and a knowledge, right? He's going to be practical about it, and he's going to be ardent about it. The other key component that I want to point out, actually there's several here, is also that Pluto is sitting there in the 10th house in none other than Aquarius. So guess what? Mercury is sitting in the 10th house. Did I just say Pluto? I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. So rewind, Mercury is sitting in the 10th house in Aquarius. Well, what does it say? It means he's going to be saying his truth. He's going to speak his truth, and it is for the greater good. He is looking out for you. He's doing you a solid here, so pay attention. Also, a few other interesting notes, and again, just sticking with the inner wheel, and I'm going to be expanding on this to show you some of the points of emphasis here. In the 11th house, he has Venus and the Moon in conjunct in Pisces in the 11th house. Now, the 11th house is going to play a theme, as you can only imagine, seeing the rest of his transit here. But I want to pay attention. I want to focus in just on that in terms of a natal chart right now. What that is that he is going to be passionate. This is the Aquarian house. So this is something about him being able to say, like, listen, you've got to love yourself. If you're going to love yourself, equality is where it's at. By the way, the Moon and Venus get together. What it typically means, and it's a wider conjunct. A lot of people talk about that, 8%, that 8 degree kind of being the cutoff instead of the 10%, or 10 degrees rather. But here we are. And what this means is that he is going to be the beacon of peace for all. By the way, Piscean energy is actually about the Christos and Christ-like energy. This guy absolutely embodied it. But again, it was about the network. It was about being able to lead other people. This is part of it. Now in the 12th house, having Uranus, and Uranus will be brought up again. Don't worry, everybody. You know I will. And you also have Chiron and Jupiter in the 12th house. Well, the 12th house is also kind of like the driver for a lot of the things what you want to get, but you got to be careful not to overdo it, because you can get a little dreamy and over your shoes. That's known as foreshadowing. He's also got the North Node in Taurus. And again, his triad is really interesting too, because as a Taurus rising, Capricorn sun, and his moon sitting in Pisces, he's kind of got a little bit of everything going on there, right? But he's going to be more of an earth sign more than anything else. He's going to be practical. He's going to be, I keep using the word ardent, and it comes back to his Taurinian ascending here, right? That's why I'm bringing that up. Now, another thing that I want to point out before we go into, I'm going to be taking a look at the 6th house, obviously, and then also the 12th, 11th, and 12th house. But look at the opposition of Uranus. He's actually got 3 call symbols going on here of like, are you sure you want to do that? Now, Uranus was in Virgo at the time, and it was conjunct with Pluto in the 5th house. So there's something about kind of like that Leo 5th house energy of driving it. But of course, it's in Virgo, so it's kind of like a self-righteousness, quite frankly. It is a self-righteous positioning. And to have that in opposition, not necessarily a full opposition, but it's a wide opposition to his natal Uranus, it's significant, especially because Uranus was in the 12th house. But pay attention to, in the natal chart, his 6th house is pretty open, which when a house is open like that, it's an open house. Anybody can come, anything can happen. It could be bad, it could be good. It's what you make of it. So for him, the 6th house is a big deal. And by the way, he has a very traditional, again, just focusing on the center square, the center chart there. He has what's known as a spread chart. He's spread out all over the place. It also means he's got a lot of tools as a human being. He's also got high empathy because that Neptune sitting in the 5th house is all about him realizing that how his motion is going to be has to be calculated, and it has to be creative. And he's all about creating and dissolving the illusion of where things were. And again, we don't get too much into, say, retrogrades in this type of chart, but I'm going to tell you Neptune was in retrograde. I'm 90% sure here, because I think it had just gone, either it had just gone station or it's in retrograde. But you still have that shadow time of kind of what's going on, even if when it comes station, which means the 1 point. When it starts to move forward again, it starts moving slow. By the way, I have my own effects. But anyways, let's take a look at some of the other charts that I have prepared. And again, it's all working off of this one. Let's take a close-up of the 6th house here. And by the way, thank you so much for commenting, liking, and subscribing. If you've got an idea for another person that you'd like to see a chart done on, go ahead and put it in the comments below. Also, this came from more than one person about suggesting kind of like how to do this. I have another close medium here who was talking about, oh, can you highlight things and that sort of thing. I don't have that technology yet, but I am going to kind of focus in on this and make it a little bit larger. So he's got a couple of things going on. Again, note that the 6th house in his natal doesn't have anything in it, but it does have the ascending, and it does have the South Node, which is kind of a chill pill. It's a chill pill placement, right? It's kind of like you don't have to be right all the time. You don't have to be whatever. You also can take your ball and go home. That's kind of that feel. But then you have Neptune going over the South Node. It's kind of a give-up code. It's kind of a code where you just kind of go like, you know what, I don't know. I'm tired of figuring it out. You have the South Node, which is really kind of about old energy. You've got Scorpion energy here, which, by the way, death, rebirth, and you have them in conjunct here. Now, it's 2 degrees conjunct, but this is a pretty solid conjunct. And the 7th house being about relationships, it's about him ending some things. It's about him saying, you know what, this isn't worth it. And guess what? If you take a bullet and you're laying there and you're like, do I fight this or don't I? Let's also take a look at the 5th house, where Jupiter is going over that Neptune. Now back to Neptune. Neptune is squaring here. The Neptune square to Neptune is one of the midlife crisis calling cards, right? Where the illusion, you have to take a look at the illusion, and maybe not everything is going the right way for you. Now, listen, this isn't a true square. We've got a couple of degrees off on this, but we're close. We're close enough to call it, right? We're within the 4. We're a little less than 4 degrees apart in terms of the square. But this is a wake-up call for him to be like, are you sure you want to do it this way? And don't forget, at this point, he's already marched in Alabama. He's already led crews of people. He's already started to create waves and changes. Now might have been a time for him to say, let's strengthen our relationship so that then we can get what we need and then plant those things down the road. By the way, some of those people that were there to listen to him were people like Jesse Jackson, who took that and really tried to drive it. Now, as a politician, I didn't care much for Jesse Jackson, and I'm not being critical of it. I just couldn't relate, probably because of my own ignorance, but he inspired many people down the road. You know, even Reverend Al Sharpton, even, I mean, there's a whole handful of people that were in that. You know, you talk about coaching trees in the NFL and football. There were a lot of coaching trees of Martin Luther King, that of people that were inspired, that looked to bring that forward, up to and including Raphael Warnock, who's now, who won his election, his runoff with Herschel Walker, who is a reverend in his church, right? He inspired a lot of people. And this right here, having that Neptune in the 5th house, is that kind of inspiration. Like we don't have to put up with this. We can reveal the illusion. Well, as it moves into the 7th house, and it moves over the south node, his natal south node, it's kind of he should have been taking a little bit of a vacation, but instead he was ramping up for the summer, right? It's kind of a rough moment here. Now, you also have Pluto and Pluto and Uranus in a conjunct in Virgo here. And this is kind of a tricky and dicey thing, because you have Pluto, which is the power and the rebellion, right? And it's sitting in the 5th house, so it's like, how do you want to rebel? Listen, his mission, don't forget his mission from his chart was to make sure that you understood that things didn't have to stay the way that they were, and that he was going to speak his truth. And his truth was for the greater good. Incredible stuff here. Incredible stuff. I've got a couple of notes here, which is what I want to pull up here real quick. And again, it's almost impossible to remember all of the stuff. No. It's impossible to remember all the notes that I go into this. In the James Earl Ray, it's interesting to me that he attacked him from a banister. And by the way, when he was processed for, the criminal terms of assassination, murder, or whatever, and by the way, he was considered assassinated, which is interesting because he was targeted. By the way, his parole numbers and all that other stuff always added up to 9. I just thought that was interesting and kind of an interesting point. But you talk about the people that he inspired, like Medgar Evers, who ended up taking a true political position. He was Secretary of State, I think, of Alabama, and he was assassinated as well. He was inspiring this change on such a cellular level, and that's part of what you're seeing this being affected by. I want to go over the 12th house here, and the reason why I'm doing that is because that's where a lot of my notes are. The 11th and 12th house. Welcome to the party, everybody. The party's in the 11th and 12th house. So a couple of things that I want to point out right away. Now, again, let's recap here on the natal side of it. In the 11th house, you've got the moon and Venus in conjunct there in Pisces in the 11th house. And then you have into the 12th house, you have Uranus. And then you have Jupiter and Chiron in conjunct. By the way, he was headed towards a Chiron return. He was going to have to wait it out. Looks like he probably had, probably another 4 years, give or take on the retrogrades here. But Chiron is sitting in his 11th house. And oh, by the way, there's also Mercury in conjunct with Venus. He was going to speak his truth. Remember that calling symbol that he had over there in the 10th house, which I have cut off, but I think is more important that we see this, that he was going to speak his truth and he was going to be talking to it from the network. This is a lot of public appearances right here, by the way. But you also have Venus in conjunct with Venus. Uh-oh, hang on. Traditionally a good symbol, by the way. It's a time to renew your self-love and about to review, in this case, your friendships, your networks, your connections with things. But don't forget, he was hardwired to make sure that he was going to speak his truth. So when his natal Mercury in Aquarius shows up, he had just passed it probably about 4 weeks earlier, probably when he had planned this event, being in conjunct with Venus, who was in conjunct with his natal Venus, which was in conjunct with his moon in the 11th house, is kind of a martyr symbol. It's kind of sort of him fulfilling his destiny, again, for this greater good. The 11th house is Aquarius, everybody. He was doing it for everyone. Now, let's talk about his undoing here in the 12th house. Oy vey. You've got a conjunct of the North Node, which is in a almost true conjunct of Saturn and the Sun. Now, traditionally, when the Saturn and Sun get together, it's, by and large, most of the time, pretty good. Aries is kind of a little bit of a corruptor, and it's kind of an ardent, again, I'm using that term, ardent, value. The dynamic here that you have is that you have not just 3, but rather 4 sitting in the 12th house, also known as the house of the undoing, but it's about hopes and dreams. He was trying to bring about some structure so that then equality would come forward. Now, having the North Node connected to this, well, this is just destiny of being a little bit hard-headed. By the way, on record, he talked about, Martin Luther King talked about how they had talked to him at several different events and said, we've gotten some very serious warnings and we really hope that you don't go do this. Now, because it was politically motivated, he, of course, said, you just want me to shut up. I'm going to go. Well, on the flip side of that, this was actually pretty good info, pretty good intel. Now you have Mars, the corruptor, the agitator, right? The self-righteousness, with all the other combinations that he has. And by the way, we're kind of in a trine energy here with Mars. I'd have to take a look at the full chart again to show you guys. But you have Mars, for the sake of our conversation, you have Mars conjunct with his Chiron. That ain't a good day. Mars being the agitator and you taking a full look at yourself and going, what the fuck? Ah! Not cool. Not cool. When Mars gets conjunct with Chiron, it is a reckoning. When it happens in the 12th house, it's an assassination. It's kind of a thing. And by the way, there are some really kind of cool things, if you want to call it that way. When you have the Sun conjunct with... let me pull up the other one because I'm going to remember this as I talk about it. To have the combination of the Pluto and Uranus conjunct in Virgo, right? Which was happening in the transit in the 5th house in this. By the way, and I'm gonna have to look up my notes on this one here too. Significantly, this didn't happen again until last year, and I just want to point this out because I had it in my other notes here, and thank you so much for giving me a little bit. I really do try and be all sorts of professional. Uranus and Pluto in the 5th house conjunct in Virgo happened at the end of May 2022. What happened on that, during that time was the Uvalde shootings. Specifically, May 29th was the true conjunct, and the shootings actually happened on the 27th rather. It was on that Friday of Memorial Day, or the Thursday of Memorial Day. So that's a call symbol of chaos. That's a call symbol. And again, it's down here in the, I'm going to pull this up again. It's down here, right here. This conjunct right here of Pluto and Uranus in this very similar position is the near exact position of the Uvalde shootings. I just want to give you guys a heads up that, and again, you can dismiss this and say, well, there's always cycles and things are going to happen every day. The term shooting and unnecessary death, and quite frankly, it also lends itself to other people that knew the difference and knew it could happen, didn't do anything. We have to learn a lot of lessons from Uvalde and how first responders didn't respond at all. Maybe we didn't protect Martin Luther King the way that we should have because of advanced knowledge. But this chart means a lot to me. This chart, for a white kid that grew up in upstate New York that hardly knew anyone of color growing up, and when I did, I valued them, but it still felt weird. It wasn't until later when I had, friends that I was able to work with and really kind of understand racial dynamics and say, I'm kind of the asshole here. Like, yeah, you guys are talking about it all the time, but why am I so offended that you're talking about it? Well, it was my own bias. It was my own conditioning. And trust me, I didn't have Archie Bunker sitting at home, giving me spoon-fed things of racism. It was the exact opposite, quite frankly. But I couldn't conceptualize it. And it wasn't until I was about 30 years old when I started to say, why the hell do we have Martin Luther King Day off? This is completely unnecessary. Why are we doing this? And then I look at his chart and I realize he revolutionized how we look at equality. He revolutionized a wound that we've had for a long time. He made us take a look at our patterns and our systematic racism. Because what he really wanted was for us to evolve. By the way, the song Pride by U2 not only mentions, it's kind of about Martin Luther King and the assassination day, he certainly brings it up, but he kind of goes down the side of it for people that have been assassinated for the greater good. It's called Pride for a reason, because he had pride in changing the world, but on this day, he also had a lot of ignorant pride. He was ardent in what he did. There's that word again. On this day, he was going to make sure of this. He believed in who he was. And by the way, my education in who Martin Luther King was came in the form of music by a band called King's X. And I didn't even realize I did this, and I wore this shirt today. They have a great song called The King is Coming. It actually talks about how a couple of kids in Texas got together to become a really cool band called King's X. It was 2 white kids and a black kid, if you want to count score. But it was really about understanding how that education came to be. Doug Pinnick, who's the lead singer, was born and raised in Texas. And he went to an all-white school. He was the kid that kind of stood out, so he looked for people to look up to. And he wrote this incredibly cool song called The King is Coming, because he was waiting for that to happen so he could justify who he was. He grew because of that, and then I grew because he wrote a song about it. I've read up on him and I understand enough, but I'll never fully understand it. But looking at his chart makes me realize how much he was on a mission on the work that he was meant to do. It was for the greater good. It was for a message of equality and understanding the human condition, so then we can get out of our own way and not worry about things of the color of our skin. In a whole bunch of great quotes, he's going to be misquoted all over the place today on Martin Luther King Day, which is his birthday, in memory of his birthday. And someday, We will no longer judge people by the color of their skin, but the content of their character. My favorite quote from him, far and away, comes in the form of, "I've decided to stick to love because hate is too great of a burden to bear." It's a thing. The Ukraine war has been going on for over 327 days. It's time for us to pay attention here. We've got to get out of our own way. And we have to follow in the words of peace, in the words of understanding. And by the way, make sure you do your own education of Martin Luther King, because this too is one of the most photoshopped pictures on the face of the internet. All they had to do was take off his index finger so it looked like he was flipping everybody off. Albeit awkward, he's giving the peace sign. And if you do your reading, you'll understand that he was standing up for the rights of those in St. Augustine, Florida, who were told that they couldn't drink from a water fountain. They couldn't attend and eat in a restaurant. And they certainly had to say, "Yes, sir," "No, sir." And he stood up for them. And he said, "No, you do not." And then he showed the peace signs because he truly wanted to live in peace and harmony. Make me a channel of your peace. That's the message of Martin Luther King. Going to give you guys a heart tap so you can remember that we love and care for one another, and to remind you to simply keep going. It's been an honor to talk about Martin Luther King, his chart, and understanding what makes him tick. And I hope this is inspirational to you to do a deeper dive in the plight of where we are in civil rights and where we're at in this world. We can't go backwards. Now's the time to push forward. And that's why we're going to give each other a heart tap, tell one another, and remind each other to simply keep going. All right, guys, I'll see you guys soon.